Okay, whenever
Dacia
you're
could show up.
ready.
Dacia?
Dacia.
Dacia could show up. Aaron can't.
Patrick?
That's
no, just
okay.
kidding.
Well, it could have been. My mother was French, so.
Oh, that's
There you
right.
go.
I remember that.
Patrick it
is. All right, so I'll be Antoine today.
Sophia. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming. This is our Willamette Week Oregon House of Representatives District 28 endorsement interview. Just a couple reminders. This is not necessarily meant to be a debate, but if you want to respond to something the other person said, feel free. We don't guarantee equal time, so if we have more questions for one candidate over the other, that's just kind of how it is. And if we interrupt you amidst a lengthy answer, we mean no disrespect. We kind of just got to keep things moving because we have a lot to get through. So we're first going to start by asking for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running. Dacia, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to do this in person. Thank you, Patrick. My name is Dacia Graber, and I am currently the state representative for House District 35, which is Tigard in Southwest Portland, and I am running for re-election with redistricting in 28, which is Southwest Portland and East Beaverton. I come to the legislature with almost 23 years now as a firefighter and paramedic, and really between that and raising 4 children, my activism and community advocacy really was what drew me to run for the legislature in 2020. And it's been a pretty incredible process, and I know we can dive into that after, but kind of being called to folks at their most vulnerable moments and having a real hands-on kind of boots-on-the-ground experience of what stresses Oregonians are facing and what the real conditions of climate change, all these different things. I found that by going to Salem and advocating for policy and meeting with my legislators and championing things, that I could actually make a change as one person. And I thought, I had no plans to run for office when Representative Doherty was retiring. She was actually visiting me at a fire camp that we do to bring young women between the ages of 16 and 20 into the fire service. And she said, you got a lot of energy. You should consider running for office. And I went, oh, no. And went home and told my family that. And they went, oh my God, why wouldn't you do that? So now I'm incredibly privileged to make that hands-on change that I get to do on a fire engine, one person at a time, for my entire community. Very privileged.
Great, thanks. Patrick?
My name is Patrick Castles. My point of view is that as a lifelong Oregonian, Oregon has changed, not for the better, but for the worst on so many fronts, and that's why I'm running. I've raised my 3 children and lived with my wife, where we are currently in Southwest Portland, just blocks away from where I was raised. And they all went to the same high school I did. Went to Multnomah Grade School, which doesn't exist anymore as a grade school. So I've been totally invested in this district that we're running in because of the negative changes and the positive assertions that I can make, improvements that I believe I can make as a candidate for District 28. I did run in District 38 before. It was kind of an interesting twist how these things work, because 38, which was Southwest Portland down through Lake Oswego, suddenly became, as Dacia mentioned, Southwest Portland and East Washington County. So while there was a change there, it wasn't a great change for me, except there is some additional population involved, and some additional land up in the northern part of the district. So the reason I'm running has to do with what I'm seeing as a more violent environment. We used to have a very peaceful neighborhood. We now have people living in tents nearby. We have homelessness just as a general problem. I visited Bend not too long ago, and they had a full street of campers and tents, just like Portland, but on a smaller scale. I believe that Oregonians are overtaxed, and that taxes are in part a cause of the poverty that we're seeing now, and the I want to say, dislocation of the population. We have people leaving Oregon. There are more people coming in because Californians, I believe, see Oregon as a better place than California to live and somewhat cheaper. But that won't last long at the rate that we're going, and at the rate that we're taxing people and regulating to such an extent that the only winners are the bureaucrats who make their living at the public expense. I'm also concerned about education because I believe that education is failing in the state. Even Colton McGill recently said that it was not good that our development, our graduation rate rather, is abysmally low. And we have a long way to go to make Oregon a great place to live again, where people can come and their families can feel safe, their children can learn, and everyone can prosper.
Thanks. If elected, are there? It sounds like you think we're overtaxed both at the state and probably more locally. If elected, are there current taxes you would seek to repeal?
Well, we're number 5 in the country in terms of per capita taxation, and
How many cities? I mean, you're talking
the state.
The state, not
The state. Yes.
Okay.
No,
I
don't know.
I think the city might be higher, but anyway, go on.
It
I
could
think
be.
Multnomah County is higher, but
Yeah, that's.
But taxation, of course, is a burden that we all have to face because we have, obviously, burdens and obligations towards the development of the city and growth in education. As I said, my children are all out of school at this point, except for one who's going to college, but she's going to be out of college pretty soon, too. So, as someone paying healthy property taxes and other taxes, just got a arts tax bill for my daughter who lives in New Jersey. We are under a considerable burden just to keep going. And I have talked to seniors who have felt the same way. That affects seniors that they feel like they're being pushed out of their homes because just of property taxes alone. It's a person-to-person thing. We will be here forever, I think. But other people feel very much like they're being pushed out of the state because they can't afford to pay for all of the dreams that legislators have, and that the political monopoly in Salem really wants to add.
And if elected, what taxes how would you remediate what you see as a too high taxation?
I think that we can find places to reduce taxation. If I had a choice, I'd probably get rid of the corporate activities tax. I realize that brings in $1 billion a year to public schools, but the state enjoys a flush bank account right now, and they can afford to at least either give people back some of that money or cut out the taxes which are making food and fuel and everything more expensive. That's the power of taxation, is that even if you get something in return, you still lose because in order to administer all this, it requires a bureaucracy. I was reading just recently that the city of Portland has a homelessness office, and that there are 9 people with 6-figure salaries, and we're not seeing a lot of homelessness eliminated in this city. In fact, it may even be growing. There's very little progress being made, and I have some suggestions on how we can make progress.
What are those suggestions?
Well, one, I think somebody has to be in charge. There's no single individual who's in charge of this entire process. We've got Measure 110, which provided money, and the first dollars are beginning to flow on that. And as a consequence, we're going to see something happen, but I don't know what. Willamette Week recently did an article on the Taft Hotel, if you recall that, and how people who are living there were displaced, and at least one individual ended up living up on the street. I think we can help people and use the money productively instead of creating a bigger bureaucracy. That would be another area I would be interested in dealing with, is cutting back the bureaucracy and just being an efficient operating state instead of one that exists in order to create more jobs for social science majors.
So we're going to move on, sorry, but I appreciate that. If you had to pick the two biggest issues you think your future district or maybe future district is facing right now, what would you say those two biggest issues are?
Only two.
Only two.
Housing and homelessness, Oregonians, and I agree with Patrick. A lot of our fellow House District 28 folks, and especially our seniors and folks living on the margins, are being priced out of not only the area but potentially the state. So that's a two-pronged approach: moving people from homelessness through recovery, and it's not an overnight thing. It requires wraparound services, the move from sheltering to housing, and then making sure that housing remains affordable and that we have enough housing stock, because I think you've heard we are 36,000 houses short this year, and that's only projected to increase. So housing and homelessness, and then I think the issue I hear the most about from my constituents that they're the most vocal about are the schools, and ensuring that we have adequate funding for our schools and that our children are having the opportunity in public school for a robust education. I think my kids went to the same school yours did, Patrick. Now Ida B. Wells, is that
yes,
right?
That's what it's called.
And it's a wonderful school, but again, we go back to taxation, and that CAT tax was the bare minimum at moving a productive level of funding for our schools. So I know there's challenges with that. We have an obligation to meet small businesses in the moment and do things like we did in 2021 and roll back some of the taxes on the uninsurance that we had. That was a very successful thing. That was a bipartisan bill that we came together to accomplish. But we have to make sure that our students are I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The graduation rates, the effects of the pandemic, the effects of schools being closed really were a heavy burden, and now we have to come together as a community to lift that back up. I think cutting the CAT tax, the tax that actually funds the operation of these schools in so many ways, is not the path forward.
How do you propose we get more adequate funding for schools? Does that mean more taxation for you? What does that mean?
No, I think it's a level of efficiency. I kind of joked with the Speaker of the House that if I could create a new committee, I would call it the DAO, the TAO, the Transparency, Accountability, and Oversight. We have a lot of money flowing into schools. We do have levels of bureaucracy. Ensuring that the money we've allocated goes to where it's intended to go is important. I think that we need to meet students in the moment where they are. And right now, that moment is recovering from the pandemic. It's mental health services, it's crisis services, it's trauma-informed education, and bringing folks back together. I think when we build the conditions that have challenged our students and we heal, we bring everybody back to whole, that's a way to move things forward. I don't think it requires a new tax, and I frankly will go on record and say I don't think now is the time for new taxes. We're facing a recession. We've asked a lot of Oregonians. I'm a homeowner and I pay those taxes too, and it's a lot. And we're a dual income blue collar household. We should be able to do fine, and it's we watch our funds. But ensuring that the schools are supported, I think the current funding equation, the current service level funding equation, could use some tweaks. I'm not on the education committee. I'm speaking more to this from a parent who is experiencing this in real time.
How old are your kids?
So 2 are in college now, and the first one graduated when the pandemic hit. He's at U of O, the other one's at OSU, and his last 2 years of high school were online. And then our daughter just graduated. She's at Southern Oregon, and her senior year was back in person, but limited. And our youngest is a junior now. He's a rising junior.
Yeah.
What are 2 bills you've championed in your time in the legislature?
2? Only 2?
Only 2. Gotta pick your top 2.
The top 2, wow. I think the one that's most personal to me, and I think folks don't realize the lift that it was the firefighter cancer presumption bill. We did something that hasn't been done anywhere, and that's we went into the existing presumption and opened it back up and added to it. And there's a whole lot of moving parts to that. There was fierce opposition in 2021 when I brought that, because from business and industry, essentially, in insurance special districts. They were worried about it increasing the cost of payout, and it was just something that wasn't done. So we worked that bill through MLAC. I worked incredibly hard to get a robust bipartisan support with that. I mobilized firefighters to call their representatives, and in the end, we had over 55 Republican and Democrat senators and representatives who sponsored that bill. And, that's personal to me because I've buried my fellow firefighters. I've watched them die from this. We don't ask when we're sent into conditions, we just go. That's what we do. And then my husband was hit with throat cancer, with job-related throat cancer, and that was a fight and a struggle.
Is he a firefighter as well?
He is a firefighter as well.
And was that from firefighting?
Yes, it was determined to be a result of fire. And we don't even know if it's necessarily just smoke inhalation. There's PFAS, there's all these microplastics and chemicals in our gear, in the things that burn. And the other glaring inequality there was that when I started looking at the presumption, I went, as a female firefighter, there is no cancer presumption for any of my reproductive organs. Are you kidding me? And I started asking, when we did this in 2008, why wasn't that included? And it was a room full of guys and one woman, and they were like, well, we didn't think of it. So we fought for that. And then in the same lane, I'm going to stay with a theme here. While I'm not, my name is not on the bill because it came from the governor's office, I am so proud of the efforts that we took to craft and pass Senate Bill 762, which was the wildfire bill. And so many, I think the piece of the bill that is still being worked on and is problematic, frankly, is the mapping, and that is a very small part of that bill. There were so many things that were, and it was deep, intense, every week, early morning meetings, bipartisan meetings, being, locked in a room with my Republican counterparts and saying, we're not going to walk out of here until we have a solution that we can live with. And it has changed the game entirely. So for example, 2020, the Labor Day fires, those were historic, and we all know the damage that happened there. Well, Labor Day this year, eerily on the same exact weekend, we had a very similar storm. The wind gusts weren't as strong, but the sustained winds were, and the relative humidity was lower. That bill had allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for new firefighting equipment, for new staffing levels. People across the state, small departments that wouldn't ordinarily be staffed up, were able to have that staffing, and we were able to pre-position resources so small fires stayed small.
What do you think has been your biggest failure as a legislator?
I think, I'm trying to think of, I was very blessed to be very successful with my bills in both sessions. I had but overall, it's really not seeing through, not understanding the process and having the oversight on where the money goes. So I go back to the housing and homelessness issue, and I recognize that there's this very defined pathway that money travels, and we want a result overnight, because it is heartbreaking to see people struggling and living on the streets. That's not compassionate care of our fellow citizens. But really not seeing that through. And then also, quite frankly, I was one of the few Democrats that spoke up on social media and was like, I'm not sure about schools being closed this long. But I didn't fight that through the system. And I was watching it. My kids, just to be upfront, did really well. There were 4 of them at home because college was remote too, and they had each other and they had that social network. but I think we're just now starting to see some of the collapse of the system that happened there.
So you think, sorry, just to be clear,
Yeah.
so you think one of your failures has been that you didn't really fight for schools to reopen sooner?
Right.
Okay.
And I fully support the closure of the schools when we started. I think that no one, especially me, expected to be running for the legislature and then serving in a global pandemic that was unprecedented. And I truly believe that everyone in the legislature, everyone approached it with a view of what do we do to keep people safe and to keep people healthy. And I take pride in that. I believe we tried to be informed by the science, but we had a duty to follow that as it changed, as we looked at trends. And it was imperative to keep students safe and their families safe and teachers safe, but I do think that there were hybrid things we could have done. The other failure, and I shouldn't be talking about my failures this much, but we had a year to improve ventilation and systems in schools, and we didn't get it done. Mm-hmm. And that is a big frustration to me, not just for a pandemic, but for a healthy learning environment in a rapidly changing climate.
Patrick, if elected, where would you stand on environmental issues?
Well, I'm very much a supporter of environmental issues. As I said, I live in this state and I've lived in it my entire life. And part of the reason for doing that is to enjoy the beauty of where we live. It's a unique place. We had my daughter and prospective son-in-law visit us this summer, and he hadn't been out here to really see very much of it. He was here once before, but didn't see very much. And so we took him down the coast and gave him a dune buggy ride in Florence. And then we went down to Golden Beach and gave him a ride on the water so he could enjoy the ride up to Agnes on the jet boats. And we took him to Crater Lake, and he was marveling at how blue the water was. And I actually worked at Crater Lake years ago, so I knew what it was like. But it's a privilege to live here. It shouldn't be such a privilege that we pay higher and higher taxes just to enjoy the prospect of living here instead of a place like Florida, which is being flooded with a hurricane or some other location like New York or Chicago, where it freezes people during the winter.
If I could just refocus you a little bit, what would you do if elected to combat climate change?
Well, I think the main thing that we have to do is to understand it better. I don't quite agree with all of the statements that are made about it, and that's because I'm looking at and reading from Steve Coons, who is an Obama official, and he debunks a lot of the myths.
What's his book?
Unsettled.
Yeah, that's
the name
it,
of the
yeah.
book.
What things do you think we're hearing that are myths about climate change?
That there are more hurricanes, for example, than there were in the past. I don't think that this is a settled issue, and I'll tell you why. 13,000 years ago, we had an ice age, and the ice covered the northern cap of the Earth. There was an ice level of a mile high, and it extended all the way down to what is now the United States. And then it melted, and there were only a handful of people who were living in the Earth or on the Earth at that time. And so it wasn't human activity that caused it. Let me give you a clue here. Look up Milankovitch cycle, and that might help you out in understanding that there is another point of view on this issue.
Do you think humans are worsening climate change? What do you think humans?
Well, I'm not an advocate for more carbon dioxide. That's not the point.
Right, but do you think humans are the main drivers of climate change, or no?
I don't believe that's the position of anybody that I've studied who talks on the subject, like Steve Coons. over a long period of time, you can say that there may be an effect, and that's what a lot of these people are saying. Another person I was talking to or reading about was Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, and he said it's just total bunk that you can control the climate. Humans cannot control the climate, is what he was saying.
So you don't believe
And-
humans have an effect on climate change? Or at least not a substantial
Not a
one?
substantial one, no.
What do you think does?
It's, I think that we don't know totally what that answer is, but the Milankovitch cycle, to follow up with what I said before, has to do with the tilt of the Earth and its rotation around the sun. It gets into physics, and I don't know much beyond that. But it has to do, the climate has to do with factors that we don't fully understand yet, including, that's why we're still studying it. If we knew the answers, then we wouldn't still be studying the same things over again. I'm not saying that the Earth isn't warming up. It is warming up.
So does that mean that the correlation, it's not causation, it's correlation, that the amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere are spiking, and we're getting more and more record highs all over the world? That would, in your view, that just happens to be, is that
I would say at this
the
point,
correlation? Does one have anything to do with the other? Because that is a fact that this carbon dioxide levels are spiking right now,
but
faster than they have in thousands of years.
yes, and as I said, I'm not an advocate for carbon dioxide, but what I'm saying is that part of it is correlation, but you have to understand that the Earth absorbs the carbon dioxide, so it's getting exaggerated as a cause because of how much that goes into the air, but you don't take it into account what's coming out.
Well, right, the oceans sequester it, but now people are talking about the capacity of oceans to sequester. Can we bring this back to Oregon for 1 minute on climate? Have you heard this theory? And as a firefighter, this theory that the tree farms result from clear cuts because we replant with one species and they're all the same age, and that those things burn faster and harder because you've got a lot of trees of the same age that are pulling water out of the ground at an incredible rate. Whereas in old growth forests, you have different heights and you have trees that maybe aren't pulling so much. And one of the big problems with fire lately has been the net moisture content of the earth. So I'm wondering, when people say we need to cut these forests back, we need to thin them, we need to do all this stuff, is that really the answer?
I say absolutely not. I think we have to look at forest management. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the piece. And the attempts of folks to keep driving it to that really ignores the science around these big fires. And there's more and more coming out of it. But what we know is the defining factor of whether a community survives isn't the forest around it. It's how the homes are built, how the homes are hardened, the cleared space around homes, all these different things. And yes, there's some incredible studies that are going on right now in the Bootleg fire that burned last year, to look at the difference, and OSU is leading those, of how clear-cut areas and replanted areas burned versus areas that hadn't been disturbed. And what they're finding is, with those 2% of fires that become catastrophic, they burn the same. And then they burn just as hot. There's no
clear-cut regrowth versus old growth?
It burns absolutely. It burns as hot, but the old growth stores more carbon.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I am not. I did have a minor in environmental science, but I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm certainly not a forester, and I look to those folks to help inform those opinions. But when we make this, I think there's a whole other piece to forest management. You brought up issues like when you plant single species, and then you have fungal infestations or beetle infestations, and those die off. A lot of the Bootleg fire was because of the beetle infestation and the die-off. Old growth forests are naturally healthier. That said, we live in Oregon, and our forests are a living product here that we count on to build our homes. and I don't want to move away from the climate change because I think climate change is the defining existential issue of our generation, and it's our responsibility to stop kicking the can down the road. So having these conversations.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Wait, can I
Thank
just
you.
ask one more
Sorry.
forest fire question? Sorry.
Sure.
You said you were this with Labor Day. We were better positioned because you had resources in place. Were you talking about the Cedar Creek fire?
So no, that was already burning, but there were resources sent there. So they had resources already on the ground, and there are parts of that fire, and I wasn't on that fire,
Yeah.
so I can't speak to that, but it's incredibly steep and heavily forested. And it's, one thing to say, why don't they put it out? Well, the terrain is incredibly dangerous, but they were able to hold that line. It was all the new lightning starts that come in,
Yeah.
all the, the power companies making the decision, and that was part of the
Yeah.
direction from 762 to shut down. It was an inconvenience, but it
That was
saved
part of
lives.
the legislation that shut that
Absolutely,
stuff
yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Did we do better as a result of the legislation on the Cedar Creek fire than we did on the fires? What was the one?
Beachy Creek, and I
Yeah.
believe we did.
Okay.
And there will be an after action, and they're going to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still frustration that it burned as long as it did, but there's a point where you have the reality of what you can accomplish, and also a lot of these forests, there is a role for managed fire to burn through.
I heard there was
clear
some of that. Yeah.
Understood.
I drove through that fire twice.
Oh.
Okay, so if
Sorry
in
about
1 minute you each could tell us why you think you're the best candidate for this position. Patrick, we'll start with you.
Well, I have solutions to some of the problems that we have. I've mentioned some already. I believe that we're overtaxed, that we can help people by not taxing them so much, and that's part of the reason that you see people in tents. Has to do with other things, but part of the reason is that taxes, whether you're renting or whether you're a homeowner, are going to affect your ability to pay.
Wait, so you think overtaxing is driving people into tents?
I think that's part of the issue.
Even though it's a progressive tax regime, where if you make less, you pay less, and if you make less, you get the earned income tax credit.
Well, because people can't predict what the tax will be when they're older, because one thing, they don't know how old they're going to be. I mean, these are all unpredictable variables in life that you have to live with. Some people spend everything that they have, so other people save their money, and there are lots of different ways that it affects people. Taxation. I want to. This is such a big subject, and if I can go back to the cat tax as an example, the reason I picked on that, and that doesn't have to be the answer. What I'm saying is taxes need to be lowered, and I'm glad to hear Dacia say that she doesn't want to raise taxes anymore. And this also includes bureaucracy, which adds to the cost of living. In a lot of ways for Oregonians. The cost of homes has gone up because of the regulations that the City of Portland or other cities have decided to attach to building a home. We had the urban growth boundary that increased the costs to people. These are not things that they're moving parts over time, and as we pile on the taxes, this really hurts people who are trying to get by in the state of Oregon. I'm not going to be judgmental as to how people run their lives, but I think there needs to be some breathing room there for every person who wants to live here. And I just like to go back to the cap tax for one thing. The reason I'm picking on that tax is because it covers everything. Your drugs have to be transported, and the cap tax taxes the fuel and other things related to the transport of drugs. So drugs are going to be higher as a result of that. Same with food. Even though it doesn't directly affect food, they have to be transported. And there are other associated costs that go along with that. Every input gets taxed under the cap tax. So that's why I am after that particular tax. But it doesn't have to be that. It's a good start to hear a state representative say that she's not going to raise taxes. But I would like to. I'd like to hear. I would like to hear 59 other people say the same thing.
I don't think
Thank you. All right. 1
anyone
minute.
wants to raise taxes. I think we have taxes, but I think we all recognize the
But
state we're in.
let's-
But if I could go back to the question.
Let's run
at
Oregon
hand.
efficiently and well, and then we won't need to tax people so much.
I love that vision. I'd love to see the plan to get there.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you.
Thank you. With my minute. So I ran for the legislature because of conditions I saw on the ground, and I came in with a vision and a plan. Patrick had mentioned legislative dreams. My dreams were to help people recover from the pandemic and have people thrive, work to address the issues at hand, and I was able to do that. I was able to pass transformative legislation in every health sphere, from wildfire to worker protections, healthcare, and I'm very proud of the work that I did, and I feel like I'm just getting started. You can ask anyone in that building, they may not like me, but I am willing to work across the aisle. Well, we actually get along pretty well. That's the dirty secret of Salem, is outside of that.
Is that right?
We do.
Really?
Actually, yeah. I break bread with folks you wouldn't believe. And I know how to build those relationships and how to get the work done. And I'm proud of that, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that. I think that this is the time now to have big, bold, visionary leadership that is rooted in empathy and compassion and all the good things. And the democratic principle is not out of fear, but we have our best days, I really do believe, are ahead, but we are in tough times right now, and we are going to have to get to work, and we started that process, and I want to see it through.
Perfect. Okay, so we end with sort of a lighthearted question.
Are we done, or
if
I have
the
some
world
more?
if the world was ending tomorrow, what's one food, not meal? What is the last food you would eat, Patrick?
I know. Wanna
That
think on
would
it?
be pizza.
Pizza. what kind of pizza? We had that same answer yesterday. What kind?
Anybody's particular pizza, like a place?
Type.
Well, we used to eat, when I was a kid, we ate at Di Nicola's. We haven't done that in a long time. It's a restaurant on the east side. But otherwise, it's probably going to be Papa Murphy's or something like that.
All right.
You gonna put pineapple on it?
I don't think I want to answer that question because my wife calls it pollution when I do that.
So does mine.
All right, Dacia.
So does mine.
So if I have to get specific, like a giant ice cream sundae, and I just found out recently I'm kind of allergic to dairy, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
It's your
It's
last
gonna
day.
be
What do you have to lose?
chocolate peanut butter with like a whole bunch of caramel sauce and whipped cream and all the stuff. Maybe
Perfect.
even some. Oh yeah.
All right, the combo that you guys just described, that's what I'll do.
That's
Yeah.
a heck of a party.
Yeah,
But
have
can I
pizza
just
then ice
comment,
cream.
like the last day of the world is not a lighthearted question.
I know. Well, yesterday I butchered it and said, if you were going to die tomorrow.
Well,
I'm like, that's not the question.
That's usually the question is like, if you're on death row, what's your last meal?
Yeah.
That's even grimmer.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
We don't have
Right.
capital
And that's
punishment
only-
here, so.
I think mine was better. It's only you dying versus the whole world. You know?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. See, I just
Yeah,
thought-
well,
Saying.
this is real upbeat around here.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Willamette Week.
Well, did you guys both get your headshots done
I haven't
with
done
Mick?
mine.
I did.
Okay, great,
Good.
great. Well, thank you both for coming in. Our endorsements are coming out October 17th in that issue, so they will be in there.